Hello, this is Tony Heller from RealClimateScience.com, setting the record straight about science. In this video, I'm going to discuss what was going on in America 50 years ago. In 1969, there was at least one scientist worried about global warming. J.Q. Fletcher, a physical scientist in Santa Monica, California, said man only has a few decades to solve the problem of global warming caused by pollution. Every 10 years, climate scientists push back the deadline date for solving global warming by about 10 years. But meanwhile, the United States and the Soviet Union were mounting large-scale investigations to determine why the Arctic climate was becoming more frigid, why parts of the Arctic sea ice had recently become ominously thicker, and whether the extent of that ice cover contributed to the onset of ice ages. This paper was published by John Holdren, who went on to be President Obama's science advisor, and Stanford professor Paul Ehrlich. They predicted a new ice age. Ehrlich also predicted that the oceans would be dead by 1980 and that America would be subject to water rationing by 1974 and food rationing by 1980. Ehrlich said, "It's already too late for the world to avoid a long period of famine." Ehrlich said, "The time of famines is upon us and will be at its worst and most disastrous by 1975. He said the population of the United States is already too big, that birth control may have to be accomplished by making it involuntary, by putting sterilizing agents into staple foods and drinking water." Ehrlich, the New York Times, and the United Nations were openly talking about poisoning the food and water supply in order to keep the population down. San Francisco, November 24, 1969. A possibility that the government might have to put sterility drugs in reservoirs and in food shipped to foreign countries to limit human multiplication was envisioned today by a leading crusader on the population problem. The crusader, Dr. Paul Ehrlich of Stanford University, among a number of commentators who called attention to the population crisis as the United States Commission for UNESCO opened its 13th National Conference here today. UNESCO is the United Nations educational, scientific, and cultural organization. I don't remember starving to death during the 1970s, but we were probably killed by global cooling or acid rain or the ozone hole. Meanwhile, the United States and the world was having a massive viral epidemic. The H3N2 virus killed about 3 times as many people globally as COVID-19. And here in the United States, the death rate from H3N2 was about double that of COVID-19. Despite all efforts by our top scientists to make a vaccine for H3N2, it still exists in the world today and returns from time to time, causing new pandemics. So how did the United States react in 1969 to a virus which had double the number of deaths per million as COVID-19? We packed 500,000 people into a giant concert venue at Woodstock, New York. I'm guessing that those people at Woodstock weren't 6 feet apart and that the total gathering size was probably greater than 10. Young people were also packing into the streets of America to protest the Vietnam War. The government was busy during the late 1960s destroying the lives of hundreds of thousands of young people in Vietnam. This came after John Kennedy was assassinated in 1963 and Lyndon Johnson took over and created a fake incident at the Gulf of Tonkin as an excuse to go to war. 50 years ago, government had different ways to destroy the lives of young people. John Kennedy's brother, Robert Kennedy, wanted to end the war in 1968, but he was assassinated before he had the chance to become president. He almost certainly would have won the 1968 election if he hadn't been assassinated. Now let's fast forward 50 years. His son says that Dr. Fauci and Bill Gates stand to profit from a COVID-19 vaccine. And meanwhile, Dr. Fauci keeps saying that we're going to have some mystery vaccine by November or December, and that we probably shouldn't restart school until the vaccine is available. This despite the fact that schools have restarted in many locations in Europe and that there's no evidence that COVID-19 is a serious threat to children. And one more thing which happened during the 1960s. President Eisenhower in his farewell address said, "We must be alert to the danger that public policy could become the captive of a scientific, technological elite." He also said that the modern electronic computer had become a substitute for intellectual curiosity. President Eisenhower was a brilliant man and predicted exactly what's going on in America now. The most popular movie of that time was 2001: A Space Odyssey, in which the computer HAL said, "The 9000 series is the most reliable computer ever made. No 9000 computer has ever made a mistake or distorted information. We are all by any practical definition of the word foolproof and incapable of error. Hal said this while he was actively trying to kill all of the people on the spaceship. This movie should have been a pretty significant warning that relying on computer models was an extremely dangerous thing to do. But here we are 50 years later doing exactly the same thing. Visit Toto on the web at realclimatescience.com. He's been pulling back the curtain on junk science and propaganda for a long time.